I'm a big David Lynch fan, and that's a huge influence. Twin Peaks is a big influence on The Nobody. I like all the greats like Scorsese. And yeah, I don't know. I specifically on these books, particularly, I can't really think of many film directors that really influenced. I'm sure. All of us grow up now seeing so much TV and movies. I'm sure that influenced my storytelling style in a lot of ways I don't even realize, but not consciously anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. I've been lucky so far that even with working with DC and stuff, they sort of hired me based on my other work, so they kind of knew the kind of stories I like to tell, and that's what they wanted me to do. So I haven't had any sort of restrictions put on me yet in terms of how I can tell a story or the kind of stories that I want to tell. And if I was working on I mentioned the Dale's class earlier, if you were working on maybe an established character like Batman or Superman or something, they have a lot more ownership over that, and they're a lot more careful about what's done with those characters and what the writers do and things. And the editors would probably be a lot stricter with me if I was working with an established character, but since they're my own creations, and they've pretty much been open just to let me do my thing as long as I meet my deadlines, and yeah, I haven't had any trouble yet. So. There's been so many Batman comics. It's like, what do you do, with the character? I could have Batman come to the farm and hang out with my parents or something. I don't know. I'd love to do some superhero stuff one day, but like I said to the class earlier, it would really have to be, they'd really have to let me do it my way, and you know what I mean? So unless I could do it in my own terms, I don't know that I'd really be interested in doing anything like that. But there's always part of you, the kid that grew up reading that stuff, you'd love to see your name on one of those books, one day. So if I ever had the chance, I'm sure it'd be hard to pass up. No, that's really hard. There's some movie people working on the Tales from the Farm stuff right now, and they had a guy write a screenplay based on the first graphic novel. And they sent it to me to read, and I could only read about 10 or 15 pages, and it just was devastating. I could not comprehend some stranger writing like Jimmy LaBeouf and Lester. It drove me nuts, and I can't handle it. No, they're such a part of me. Each one of those characters is really just sort of one little bit of my personality, or I can't let anyone else do that. It's just too personal. I think probably when I was working on Tales from the Farm, I was listening to one of her albums a lot, and she has a song called, I can't remember what it's called now, I Wish I Was the Moon, and it was about just a song about an old man sitting in a chair and sort of looking back on his life and, wishing he was the moon and he could see down, and yeah, whatever. But that was really the little spark for a lot of the character of Lou in Ghost Stories. And I've told my mom before that character comes from a few places. I had an uncle who was deaf, and he was in a nursing home right around the time I was working on Tales from the Farm, and my mom had told me a few stories of her visiting him, and some of those stories worked themselves directly into his character, and it just seemed the Tales from the Farm was a book really about a boy's imagination, and about how he would escape into his imagination to sort of escape his circumstances. And when I was working on the second book, and my mom was telling me these stories, you think of the flip side of that would be an old man who no longer has anything to look forward to and doesn't have anything to imagine anymore. So where does he escape? And that would be to escape into his past, into his memories, much in the same way a little boy would escape into his imagination. And those two characters sort of became, flip sides of a coin or whatever. And her song, those lyrics actually work themselves into the story, where there's a point where he's remembering as an old man, he's remembering an incident that happened to him when he's in his 20s, and his old man face becomes the moon watching his younger self doing this. And so that's where that's itself.
So, and what you just said about the Lester character from the first book and Lou from the second, is that why they meet at one point in the second?
Of course,
book?
And they're both wearing the same plaid jacket. Yeah, they meet he's running away from the nursing home, and the little boy's running away from home, and they meet each other on a dirt road, and they're both wearing the same plaid jacket. And they kind of have the same personality and just wish each other well on their way and keep going. Yeah. me, I feel like so many stories, so many movies, so many comics and stuff are all set in like the big city, like New York, or you know what I mean. There's just so much that there's not enough people writing stories about rural life, and also it's a lot easier to draw. Yeah, I mean, Ghost Stories, a lot of it is about the contrast of one brother living in the city and one brother living in the country, and the two paths their lives take. And I was sort of my experiences of living in Toronto at the time, but coming from here, and I sort of, you know, those two, like I think I said to the class earlier, those two aspects of my personality became two different characters almost. And, but to set something specifically in a city, for whatever reason, I just would much rather draw rural landscapes and things. It just seems, like I said, there's just so much stuff set in the city these days. It's nice to see another perspective, you know, especially, I mean, even Sweet Tooth, which is like full of action and adventure stuff. I don't think at this point I don't have any of the story planned for a city. It's all like in the backwoods and, you know, like I said, Nebraska, which is really a nice experience. Yeah, but right now I'm still really drawn to that landscape for whatever reason. I think it's the same kind of thing as like when I was living on the farm, I didn't have much interest in the place, and now I'm living in the city, so it's like you long for something else that you don't have, you know. It's always, the grass is always greener somewhere. I'm sure if I was living here, I probably wouldn't be telling these stories, you know what I mean? I think like the norm for a good comic creator, well, generally like they have DC and Marvel comics are generally almost like an assembly line style. We'll have one person writing, one person doing the pencils, one person inking, one person coloring. Whereas I'm writing, inking, and penciling all myself, so I'm able to take a few shortcuts that maybe if I was writing for someone else, I'd have to spend a little bit more time in my script explaining what I wanted things to look like. Whereas I can I can make shortcuts because I know what I'm imagining as I'm writing it, obviously. But I think like the norm for a penciler or an inker would be if you could do a page a day, that would be good. Because it's to do 22 pages a month, then it gives you time to do a monthly book. But I can generally do, I don't know, 3 or 4 pages a day sometimes. So that's, and as soon as the editors at DC saw how fast I was working on Nobody, I became one of their favorites like right away because of that. So it really helped me get another project with them. Yeah, I did. I was asked if I would ever consider drawing something that someone else wrote or vice versa. And I've only had one small experience, I told Dale, where I did a 10-page Western story that's going to come out in a little anthology this year that someone else wrote. And I found it really difficult because I'm so used to working, I'll write a script, and then if I want to change something while I'm drawing it, I'm free to change it. I don't have to, you know, run it by anybody, whereas really stick to what he wanted, and I just found it really difficult. It was so strict, and I really hated it. I think I'd have a much easier time writing something for someone else to draw than what I did. Yeah, but if it was a writer who I really respected and stuff, I'm sure I'd do it. I'm doing it. Making a living doing comics and being able to wake up every day and do what I love as my job that was my dream. So as long as it lasts, I'm happy. You know, if I have to go back to restaurants in 2 years, at least I'll have lived my dreams. You know, it's funny when you get to that point where you can wake up every day and do the thing you love, and then you have some days where you just don't feel like doing it. You know, and you have to remind yourself that you could be doing something you hate. And I guess being a professional as opposed to being what I was before was doing the thing that I love to do, even the days I don't feel like doing it. But yeah, my dream was always to work for DC Comics. So it's you know, happened. My editor at DC is the editor of a lot of the books I loved growing up, and working with him, and it was just really like a thrill, and it's been great. So.